This is the fourth in a series of 6 tutorials where we discuss the 6 basic principles of spiritual practice. Please refer to our earlier tutorial and introduction to the basic principles to understand the importance of these principles. Now, the fourth basic principle states that we should do spiritual practice according to our spiritual capacity or spiritual level. So, what is spiritual level? The Spiritual Science Research Foundation, also known as SSRF, uses the term spiritual level to describe a person's spiritual maturity or spiritual capacity. SSRF uses a scale between 0% and 100% to describe spiritual level. 0% would refer to the spiritual level of non-living things, while 100% would refer to the pinnacle of spiritual growth for a person, which is self-realization or being one with God. 80% of people in the current era, which is Kali Yuga, also known as the era of strife, fall within the 20% and 35% spiritual level category. Now, according to the science of spirituality, a person who is above the 70% spiritual level is known as a saint. Let's look at a few analogies that will help crystallize this principle. This is a very clever student who's in grade 3. But however bright he may be as a student, he will not be able to sit for his grade 4 exams right away if he has not completed grade 3 and studied grade 4 syllabus. Also, if he is made to sit in grade 2, again his performance may be lackluster as this syllabus would bore him. The next step, however, is that once he passes grade 3, he now needs to make efforts to study the grade 4 syllabus in order to move to the next level in his education. Similarly, he needs to then study for higher and higher grade exams. Now, this analogy highlights 2 important facets of our spiritual evolution. The first, we practice spirituality best when it is as per our spiritual capacity. If we try to attempt spiritual practice corresponding to a higher or lower level than ours, then it becomes difficult to sustain it. And as a result, we may set ourselves to fail at spiritual practice or even derail our spiritual practice efforts completely. And the second point is that once we have a certain comfort level with the spiritual practice we're doing, we need to strive for the next level. Only then will our spiritual growth be rapid. If not, we get stagnated in our spiritual practice. And as the old adage goes, if we always do what we always did, we will always get what we always got. So how do we decide the right stage of spiritual practice for ourselves? As per each path of spiritual practice, there are known stages or steps in it. We should choose that stage or step of spiritual practice that we feel comfortable doing. In doing so, we must incorporate the earlier basic principles, such as going from many to one and going from gross to subtle. Once we are comfortable with the new stage, we need to attempt the next stage. Attempting a new step in spiritual practice is always slightly difficult for us in the beginning. But as we persevere, we get more and more comfortable at the higher level of spiritual practice. In a way, it's like building our spiritual muscles step by step. A stepwise increase is applicable to all facets of our life if we want to grow that facet. For example, if we were to look at 2 people falling in love, then from the first attraction, a higher step would be dating only that person, and then finally committing to the person in marriage. So also, let's look at a few steps that signify an increase in our spiritual practice and a resultant increase in our spiritual level or spiritual capacity. Now, in the initial stages of chanting, we may need to do it aloud along with beads. The next step would be chanting aloud but with no beads required. And the latest step would be chanting at a mental level. With regards to how one employs his time, step 1 would be doing spiritual practice whenever there is time. Step 2 would be actually making time for spiritual practice as much as possible. And the next step would be doing spiritual practice on a daily basis. When it comes to giving our resources as spiritual practice, the steps could be donating once a year for a spiritual cause, then monthly, and then giving up part of one's wealth to serve the spread of spirituality. With regards to taking responsibility as part of one's spiritual practice, an initial step could be doing whatever task one is assigned in spreading spirituality. Later would be taking part responsibility for assigning tasks. And an even higher step would be taking responsibility for the entire project. Initially, one thinks only of one's own spiritual practice, and his spiritual practice is limited to just chanting. Later, one starts attending satsang to learn more about spirituality, and at an even later stage, he starts conducting satsang so as to nurture others in their spiritual practice. Do reflect on whether your spiritual practice follows the fourth basic principle. Is your practice of spirituality commensurate with your spiritual level or spiritual capacity? If you're teaching others about spirituality, are you teaching them as per their capacity? That's all for this presentation. Thank you for joining us.